Listen to this now. Ugandan opposition leader Bobi Wine has been placed under house arrest a day after the general elections. Early results show incumbent President Yoweri Museveni is leading as he seeks to extend his 40-year rule. Museveni, who has ruled Uganda since 1986, has been accused of brutal repression of the opposition in the run-up to the vote. His government imposed an internet blackout this week. The final election results of the presidential and parliamentary elections are expected tomorrow. Let's get some analysis. Godwin Toko from the Agora Centre for Research joining us on that. Godwin, good to have you, and thank you very much for coming on. Is this a replay of the last elections? I think in the last elections, a similar thing would have occurred where Bobi Wine would have been on house arrest.
Yeah, a replay not of the last election alone, but I think about the last 5 elections. For each of those elections, the leading opposition candidate, before Bobi Wine, it was Besigye, they are placed under house arrest. In 2005, for instance, Besigye was placed under house arrest for several weeks, even after the elections. Then he escaped and incidentally went to South Africa. He was in Johannesburg after the election. So it's a replay of the last election. We've seen the cases of police brutality during the campaigns. We've seen the claims of egregious rigging. Even right now, as we speak in Kampala, there are protests, not as big protests, but there's harsh crackdown on them. We've seen the internet blackout. So yeah, in many ways, it's a repeat, again, not just of the last election, but maybe the last 3 or 4 elections that Uganda's had.
Now, given the internet blackout, given the delays that are reported, how does one assess the credibility of this process?
Tell me, you can't. Basically, you get results, say by SMS, and there's no way you can confirm because it's the digital age, really. And Ugandans use the internet as much as everyone else to verify the results, to get information from one place to another. But now it has become really, really hard. So while the Electoral Commission is announcing figures, and progressively, I think they've just announced the 3rd batch. The 4th batch should be about 6 p.m., which is about 5 p.m. South African time. There's also a question of, they just simply come and say, as of the results we have right now, Museveni has 76%, Bobi Wine has 20%. And so there are questions like, okay, where are those results coming from? Which polling station? How are they, which district, which region? How are they brought here? A question that the Electoral Commission is not answering. So at the end of the day, it's going to lead to a lot of doubts about the credibility of the whole exercise. Not only that, but of course, so many things have led to, will contribute to that doubt in credibility, but there is no way to tell without the internet. So I guess we have to wait until the internet is back to try and verify some of these things. Unfortunately, there have also been reports of deaths, extrajudicial killings by the police. There's one particular place called Butambala where about 10 people are said to have been killed. There's Luwero where people are said to be killed as they were protesting last night. But even with those, while some of these have been confirmed by local media houses, you still cannot get the photos or more cogent evidence to confirm. So yeah, it's a big problem.
On the build-up to the elections itself, before the ban, I mean, what do we know, for example, about the makeup of the voters' roll? Again, I'm going by information that we could have received last year, that a large number, maybe even at 70% of the electorate then was made up of under 35s who were sympathetic to Bobi Wine. What is the makeup of the voters' roll this time? Were those under 35s back again? Were they discouraged? Did they stay away from the voting process?
Yeah, Uganda is a very young country. The median age is about 16, 17 years. So inevitably, most of the voters are very young people. But to put it in perspective, Museveni has been in power for 40 years. As of, you make 40 years in a week's time. Now, the thing is that about 80% of Ugandans are below 40. So many of them, even when they've voted over other elections, it gets to a point where voter apathy sets in. The question of what's there to change? Even if I vote, nothing will change. So many of them have stayed away from the voting. In the last election, I think the turnout was about 53%. In this election, the most credible projection I saw had put the turnout at about 46%. So while we saw the voting yesterday, we know that a very, very big percentage of Ugandans didn't even bother to vote. But if I said, and it's not just that they didn't bother to vote. Some of them, of course, there's a lot of military presence on the streets. So many people say, let me just stay away from trouble. Let me just stay home instead of being on the streets. Some of them register to vote in places. And then when they go to vote, they can't find their names. Yesterday, when the elections happened, there were so many people there's many polling stations where voter material arrived as much as 5 hours late, which for many people would, I mean, there are many people in Uganda who live hand to mouth. So for them, 5 hours of waiting means they're not going to make money for that day. So they would rather choose to say, you know what, let me just leave this at all. Let me just leave this and I go and work. So yes, there are those cases. But yes, while the youth are the majority and they ordinarily should determine the outcome of this election, there are many other impediments that then bring other factors into play, and we are seeing those playing out already.
How would the outcome of this election likely affect peace and stability?
Yeah, that's a big question. I guess there's no answer for that as of now. We can't authoritatively call it out and say it will lead to this or it will lead to that. Elections in the past in Uganda have been disputed, and sometimes this has led to protests. We've seen similar protests in places like Tanzania. But I must say that the Ugandan state has this policy of viewing elections as a military exercise. So for anyone who has been in Kampala over the last 1 week or so, they may be shocked whether the country is at war, because they are armed personnel carriers, they are soldiers, thousands and thousands of them, with any sort of weapon that you can think of on the streets. So many times it works in two ways. Of course, one, people won't even dare to protest because they know that if I protest, I could have a store, I could have a placard. The man on the other side has a gun that can take my life in a minute. So sometimes it suppresses the actual feelings of the people, but I don't know how long that can be. But then on the other hand also is that sometimes this can then again escalate. I was seeing a report of a place, the one I mentioned earlier, Butambala, where there was a clash between the security forces and voters of one particular candidate. Now, it's very likely that if the approach had been more cordial, more amicable, it wouldn't have escalated to that. So when it is a security matter, it can go either way. And I guess it's only a matter of time before we actually see how it turns this time around.
Yeah, we know how it would have affected election monitoring online, but do we know how election monitoring on the ground is faring up?
Yeah, so first, 3 days to the elections, several organizations, civil society organizations in Uganda that do some sort of work that relates to elections were closed. So you have organizations like the one where I work, Agora, they were shut down, they received letters shutting them down. You have the Center for Constitutional Governance. It's about 10 to 15 organizations in all. So that, of course, made the observation from civil society extremely hard. Two, the Uganda Communications Commission, before shutting down the internet, repeatedly warned radio stations that they had no mandate to announce any results. So even if they got journalists at polling stations or in particular districts to tally all the results, they were warned not to announce those results. Now, that has put many of them in a mode where they are best playing a gamble with playing music at this particular point in time instead of talking even about the elections, because you don't know where the red line is. You could cross the red line and have your license suspended. Now, all these factors put together have made it really hard to get anything to do with the results of the elections in Kampala, and make it very hard to monitor anything happening across the country. And I've also seen some of the observers already complaining about the same, that they have teams spread across the country and they cannot even coordinate or talk to each other because of the situation that is happening.
Godwin, appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on. Godwin Toko there. He is giving us some reportage on the elections currently going on in Uganda in the context of a blackout as far as the internet is concerned.